Hi, this is the measurement problem and the history reality selects. Let us begin with a click. Not with consciousness, not with metaphysics, not with a grand declaration about the nature of the universe. Let us begin with something small, clean, and laboratory real. A detector clicks. That is all. A particle is prepared. Quantum mechanics assigns possibilities. The apparatus is arranged. The experiment is performed. Then the detector clicks. Here, not there. One result appears. One record is written. One entry enters the lab book. That click is the beginning of the measurement problem. The measurement problem is not that quantum mechanics fails. It does not fail. Quantum mechanics is one of the most successful predictive frameworks ever created. The problem is not accuracy. The problem is meaning. The equations described a smooth evolution of possibilities. The laboratory gives us one definite result. The wave function evolves as possibility. The detector gives a fact. The mathematics says many outcomes are available. The world says this one. That is the measurement problem in plain language. How does possibility become record? The question is deeper than it sounds, because a record is not merely a mark on the screen. A record is a commitment. A record says this happened. A record says the world now contains this result, and future events must be compatible with it. A detector click is not just a noise. It is an entry into reality's ledger. And once we see that, the measurement problem becomes much larger. It is not merely the problem of why one outcome appears. It is the problem of why one history becomes official. A click is not alone. A click arrives with a history. That is the sentence to understand. A measurement result is never just a result. It brings with it the past that made that result possible. If the detector clicks on the left, then reality must contain a history in which the experiment led to the left click. If the click's on the right, reality must contain another different history. If a cat is alive in Schrodinger's cat in the box thought experiment, there must be a survival history. If the cat is dead, there must be a death history. If a scientist writes a result in a lab book, there must be a chain of apparatus, observation, memory, and record that makes that entry meaningful. The measurement problem is usually introduced as a problem of outcome, but the deeper problem is history. What history became real with the outcome? That is where the standard interpretation begins to show their limitations. Copenhagen gives us the operation rule. Calculate the problems, perform the measurement, record the result. Do not ask too many impolite questions about what reality was doing before the measurement. Copenhagen has been useful because it is practical. It works in the laboratory. It lets physicists calculate results without needing to solve metaphysics before lunch, which is merciful because physicists are hungry people too. But usefulness is not completeness. Copenhagen tells us how to calculate the click. It does not fully explain why this click with this history becomes the world. It gives us outcome selection. It underexplains history selection. And history selection is the real problem hiding inside the measurement problem. Let us make this more concrete. Schrodinger's cat is placed in a sealed box with a quantum trigger. If the trigger fires, poison is released and the cat dies. If it does not, the cat lives before the box is opened. The standard teaching says the cat system is described by a superposition of alive or dead. Technically, the cat in the Copenhagen interpretation exists only as a waveform. It's not until we open the box and measure the cat that it becomes real and adopts a random history. Most people think that the paradox is the cat's condition, alive or dead. Both, neither, possibly annoyed. But the real issue is not merely the cat's state when you measure. The real issue is the cat's past. If we open the box and the cat is alive, reality does not merely give us the label alive. It gives us the whole compatible history. The trigger did not fire, the poison was not released, the cat's heart continued, the lungs kept moving, the animal remained warmed and alive. If we open the box and the cat is dead, reality would give us a different history. The trigger fired, poison released, life ended, and the box contains a death history. So measurement does not merely select an outcome, it selects the past required by that outcome. A living cat needs a living cat history. A dead cat needs a dead cat history. A measurement result needs a measurement history. A record needs a record history. A memory needs a memory history. Every outcome needs a history. That is the hinge. If Copenhagen collapse is random outcome selection, then it quietly implies random history selection. It gives us the cat's final condition and politely tries to sneak the cat's entire past in through the service entrance. That is not a small oversight, especially if you apply it to yourself and your own memories and your own history. You want to assume that your parents are not randomly generated every time you close your eyes. That is the entire biography of reality being treated like a footnote. Now, Copenhagen may still be a superb practical method, but as a metaphysical explanation, it becomes shy exactly where it needs to be brave. It predicts the result. Wonderful, but what history did the result bring with it? And why is it so random? Why is our 5th birthday and our graduation random according to the Copenhagen interpretation? That is a huge paradox that has been ignored for over 100 years. This is why the measurement problem is not solved by shrugging. A shrug is not an interpretation, it is a posture. Now, another modern response is decoherence. Decoherence is important. It must be treated respectfully when a quantum system interacts with its environment. The delicate interference between alternatives becomes effectively lost. The environment becomes entangled with the system. The alternatives stop behaving like a single coherent superposition from the viewpoint of practical observation. Decoherence helps explain why the macroscopic world looks classical. That is not a minor achievement. Decoherence is environmental bookkeeping of extraordinary power. But bookkeeping is not authorship. Decoherence can explain why alternatives stop interfering. It explains why the branches become effectively separated. It explains why the world appears classical, but by itself, decoherence does not clearly explain why this one record is experienced as the actual world. Think of a film editor. Decoherence sort the possible cuts into separate folders. It keeps the scenes from bleeding into each other. Very useful, but the question remains which cut is shown in the theater. Or imagine a courtroom. Decoherence organizes the evidence into separate boxes. One box for this case, another box for that case. Excellent thing, but it does not itself deliver the verdict. We have to choose the history for that verdict. The measure problem asks for the verdict. It asks why this outcome, this record, this world. So decoherence helps explain why histories become separate. It does not fully explain why one history becomes livid or why it's coherent. So consider Wigner's friend. This is where the problem becomes almost rude. Wigner's friend is sealed inside a laboratory performing measurement. The friend observes a definite result. From the friend's perspective, the measurement has happened. The result is known. The lab contains a record. But Wigner, outside the sealed lab, afterwards, may describe the entire lab, friend, apparatus, system, notebook, and all, as one larger quantum system. From Wigner's viewpoint, the lab may still be treated as a superposed system until Wigner opens the door and interacts with it. We are Wigner within Wigner within Wigner within Wigner, but with weighted observer collapse. So whose description is final? The friend saw one outcome. Wigner may describe the whole lab mechanically also. Where exactly did measurement happen? Who decided? Was it at the detector? Was it at the friend's eye? Was it at the friend's brain? Was it at the notebook? Was it Wigner opening the door? Was it at publication? Was it at peer review? This is not a joke problem. The joke only helps us survive it. Wigner's friend shows that we cannot keep the observer outside the theory forever. The observers are always inside the system. If the observer is physical, then the observer cannot be included in the quantum description. But if the observer can be included, then the measurement cannot be a magical boundary we draw wherever convenient. The observer is inside the world. The apparatus is inside the world. The record is inside the world. A memory is inside the world. The theory must explain how one history becomes definite from inside the world. This is where the Born-Hilborn interpretation enters, not as decoration, not as motivational metaphysics, as the missing rule to quantum mechanics. The Born-Hilborn rule can be spoken plainly. Quantum mechanics supplies possible histories. The Born rule gives the quantum availability. The Hilborn rule adds expectation across space-time. That's the fix. Reality selects the coherent history. Reality equals quantum possibility multiplied by space-time expectation. Reality is selected history. Do not hear expectation as a wish, faith as a wish. This is not nursery school version where someone imagines a sports car and the universe delivers it with heated seats. It's only a vote. Expectation here means waiting structure. It includes observer state, memory, anticipation, record context, future coherence, and the pressure of what histories can become stable across space-time. A thought is not a magic wand. A thought is a weight. A memory is not merely a local file. A memory is in relation to selected history. An observer is not a ghost outside physics, and it's any loci of comparison. And an observer is a boundary inside history selection. This is why Wayne Hilborn's Markov blanket soul personification comparison matters. A living observer can be understood as a bounded system, a center of comparison. It distinguishes self from world. It receives signals. It acts. It remembers. It predicts. It accepts some possibilities and rejects others. In active inference language, a Markov blanket separates internal states from external states through sensory and active states. It does not need to be biological. It is one way of formally describing how a self-like system maintains identity while interacting with the world's mathematics. In Bourne-Hilborn language, a person is a Markov blanket with a name. That means you're a growing personification, reincarnation to reincarnation, life to life. A soul in this model is not a cartoon ghost. It is the personified boundary of comparison, the place where history, memory, expectation, and action become organized as self. The observer is not outside the measurement problem. The observer is one of the structures through which the measurement problem resolves. That is the key. A detector clicks become a record. A record becomes memory. Memory becomes expectation. Expectation becomes waiting. Waiting contributes to which history is selection. The click is not alone. The click arrives with a world. Now let us handle collapse carefully. The word collapse is useful but dangerous. From inside time, measurement looks like collapse. A spread of possibilities becomes one record. Before measurement, many results are possible. After measurement, one result is written. But from a block universe viewpoint, the full selected history may already be one coherent space-time structure. The variables are not being created out of absolutely nothing at the moment of measurement. They are being countered, revealed, or fixed from the perspective of an observer inside time. So Bourne-Hilborn does not require collapse to be a little explosion in reality and actual collapse. Collapse is just a way for you to understand this mathematics. Collapse is how selection appears from within time. That sentence matters because collapse is how selection appears. It doesn't technically need to exist in this model because all expectations are weighed across space-time, so reality flows smoothly. So we see possibility become record from the whole history viewpoint. The selected history is the coherent structure based on all loci of comparison. This is how Bourne-Hilborn can use collapse language without being trapped by the cruder version of collapse. It does not need a tiny magical hammer smashing the wave function. It needs a rule explaining which coherent history becomes the lived one. And this is the rule is on your screen. That rule is quantum possibilities weighted by space-time expectation selects that history. Now we can compare the interpretation. Copenhagen gives calculation rule and a measurement outcome. It works but leaves the measurement boundary philosophically underexplained and silly. Many worlds says every outcome happens in some branch. No collapse is needed because all branches remain. It's elegant if you believe in immortal cats. It's too extravagant. It explains the universal wave function by keeping the whole warehouse. It's silly. I think Sean Carroll is like a Jehovah's Witness when I see him preaching about many worlds. It still owes the listener an account of why this experience history is the one we know and love. Why our one world is the know and love is because of the mathematics on your screen. We select the one world that we know and love. Pilot wave theory says particles have definite hidden trajectories guided by a wave. It restores a kind of path, but the measurement problem becomes a problem of hidden configuration, effective collapse. The weak measurement gives averages. It never tracks a particle through a secret route. So it has entirely false premises and too many paradoxes. So objective collapse theories make collapse physical. That is direct and honest, but the collapse becomes a new physical process requiring its own explanation. Bourne-Hilborn says the selected object is not merely an outcome, not merely a path, not every branch, not a random hit. The selective object is the one whole coherent history. That's why it has this explanatory force. The measurement problem asks, how does possibility become one actual record? Bourne-Hilborn answers, because possible histories are weighted by quantum availability and space-time expectation, and the coherent history is selected. So in the lab, a particle is prepared, the apparatus is arranged, the detector waits, quantum mechanics provides possible outcomes, the detector clicks. Copenhagen says, here is the result. Decoherence says, the alternatives have become environmentally separated. Many Worlds says all outcomes continue in different branches, different universes. Pilot Wave says the particle had a hidden trajectory. Bourne-Hilborn says, what history did the click bring with it? That is a question the others do not emphasize enough. The click must fit the apparatus. The apparatus must fit the laboratory. The laboratory must fit the observer's memory. The observer's memory must fit the future report. The report must fit the shared world. The selective outcomes must carry a compatible history. The click is the visible tip. The history is the iceberg. And yes, one should be careful using iceberg analogies around physicists because eventually someone mentions entropy and party over. But the analogy works. We collapse the past pre-entropy. Now imagine a courtroom again. A verdict is announced, guilty or not guilty. The verdict is not just a sound. It requires a case, history, evidence, testimony, records, procedure, deliberation. If a judge announces a verdict with no trial, no evidence, no case, and no history, we do not call that justice. We call it the Copenhagen interpretation. Likewise, a quantum outcome cannot be treated as a lonely verdict. It requires a compatible case history. Copenhagen gives the verdict. Bourne-Hilborn asked for the case file and the evidence. That is why the better explanation of measurement. On a stage, before the curtain rises, many scenes are possible. The actors are prepared, several scripts exist, the lighting board is ready, the audience waits, then one scene is lit. One scene becomes visible, one scene becomes the play. But the scene cannot be random nonsense. It must fit what came before and what comes after. If Act 2 introduces a king who was never born, a murder weapon that was never placed, and a love story between characters who never met, the audience will not call it avant-garde. They will call it bad writing, unless they are critics, in which they might call it brave. Reality is not bad writing. The selected scene must fit the whole play. Bourne-Hilborn says measurement is not just lighting one scene, it is selecting the scene that belongs to the coherent history. So imagine a ledger, a bank ledger, records, transaction. Once the entry is made, later entries must balance with it. You can discover an error. You can correct it with another entry. You can reinterpret what happened. But you cannot simply change yesterday's audited balance without affecting every later record. Measurement is ledger entry. Measurement is ledger access. History is ledger structure. The detector click is an entry. The observer's report is an entry. The future paper is an entry. The selected history must balance. This is why the past is not a loose pile of old facts. It is the record structure that made the present coherent. It biases the past that led to it. Now this is where the brain memory enters. Most listeners assume memory is stored in the brain. The brain obviously matters. Damage to the brain and memory expression change chemistry and recall changes, sleep, trauma, injury, development, all affect memory. We grant this immediately. Neuroscience is not imaginary. It is just not the mechanisms for storage. So the deeper question is whether the brain is the ultimate storage container of the past. If measurement selects histories, then memory cannot be treated as merely a biological filing cabinet. Mind becomes too big for brain body. Memory becomes a relation between a present observer and a selective past. The brain may not be the interface, not the warehouse. A broken radio stops the music. That proves the radio matters. It does not prove the singer lived inside the radio. An ape is forced to believe the singer lives inside the radio. Likewise, a damaged brain can disrupt memory. That proves the brain matters. It does not prove that your entire childhood is stored as little cinema reels in the meat. In the Bohren-Hilborn model, memory belongs to the selected history ledger. The brain accesses, filters, stabilizes, and personifies that history as experience. This is not anti-science. It is a broader science. The brain remains necessary to human memory expression, but the past itself is not inside the skull. The skull is inside the history. That reversal matters. Materialism tends to imagine the brain as containing the past. Bohren-Hilborn imagines the brain as participating in the selected past. The difference is enormous. Let us consider Frobisher-Renner. This argument extends Wigner's Friend-style reasoning and asks whether quantum theory can consistently describe observers who themselves use quantum theory to reason about each other's measurements. There is debate about the conclusion, and we do not need to settle every technical response here. The important lesson is this: once observers are inside the quantum description, the measurement problem becomes unavoidable. You cannot leave the observer outside the equation and then act surprised when the observer knocks from inside the box. This resolves by keeping the experimenter inside the experiment. That is the problem with treating measurement as a primitive. At some point, the observer, the apparatus, the record, the memory, and the future report all belong to the same coherent world. The Bohren-Hilborn says yes, they belong to the same selected history. The observer is not a detachable witness. The observer is a Markov blanketed center inside that selected history. The observer's expectation is not irrelevant decoration, as part of the weighting structure. This does not mean any observer can choose any outcome. That would be unserious. It does not mean a person can stare at a detector and command it to click left by sheer ego. Ego is abundant. Its laboratory reliability is less impressive. Expectation is weight, not omnipotence. Quantum possibilities constrain selection. Prior records constrain selection. Shared history constrains selection. Coherence constrains selection. But within the field of possible histories, expectations matters. That is the Bohren-Hilborn addition. It is not a denial of quantum mechanics. We're adding to it. It is an interpretation of what quantum mechanics is doing. Quantum mechanics gives the possibility structure. Bohren-Hilborn gives the selection structure. Now let us bring this into life without losing the science. A measurement result needs a history. A memory needs a history. A self needs a history. A future observer needs an ancestry history. A future breathing body needs gas exchange histories. Atmosphere, oxygen, plants, metabolism, lungs. Plants are breath before lungs. A future hand needs grip histories, claws, fins, paws, fingers, thumbs. Crabs are grip rehearsals with attitude. Crabs are baby humans. A future child needs histories of desire, reproduction, nurturing, protection, pain avoidance, social bonding, and survival. Sex drive is not merely biology losing its composure. It is future teleology observers being extremely persistent about having grandparents and expecting to exist. These lines may sound playful, but the structure is serious. Future compatible histories carry weight and bias the paths that lead to them. A future function requires a path-compatible pathway. In ordinary evolution, we describe this from behind variance, selection, adaptation, inheritance. Bohren-Hilborn adds the weight from ahead. Future compatible expectation participates in which histories become coherent. This is teleology. No celestial mechanic is assembling thumbs with glowing pliers. There is no fairy dust being sprinkled on crabs. The claim is mathematical. Possible histories are weighted. Future compatible histories become more coherent, biased. Reality selects. Now one may ask, is this idealism? Yes, but not the shallow kind people dismiss. Idealism does not have to mean the world is fake. It does not have to mean reality is a flimsy daydream. A shared mind like reality can be more lawful, more mathematical, more coherent, and more stable than ordinary, less registrated dreams, imagery. The point is not that reality is imagery. The point is that mind, memory, expectation, and measurement may be fundamental to the selection of reality that we see. Materialism says mind emerges from matter. Bohren-Hilborn says matter may be the stable appearance of selected history, and mind participates in that selection. That is not anti-science. It is a proposed answer to the problem science itself has created, the measurement problem. It is not a religious argument. It is not a poetic mood. It is not a late-night complaint from someone who read too much philosophy and forgot to sleep. The measurement problem is real. It is a physics problem. The equations give possibilities, and this mathematics on your screen resolves all paradox. The world gives one record. Why? The one world that we know and love comes from the Born-Hilborn interpretation, because reality is the coherent selected from quantum possibilities by space-time expectation. Possibility. Quantum mechanics gives us possibility, not merely ignorance. The possibilities are mathematically real within the formalism. They evolve, they interfere, they produce statistical structure. Record. Measurement gives us a record, a detector click, a mark, a pointer position, a lab note, and an observer memory. The record is definite from within the lived world. Gives us history. A record requires a history. It cannot float alone. It must fit the apparatus, the environment, the observer in the later world. Expectation and faith. Expectation waits histories. Not childish wishing, structured expectation or faith, observer state, memory, anticipation, future compatibility, collective record, and coherence across space-time is what gives the selection. Reality is a selected coherent history. And the collapse doesn't have to be a physical collapse. Collapse is how the selection appears from inside time. So let us dismantle the old picture. The old materialist picture says the world is made of definite stuff and that measurement reveals it. Quantum mechanics says no, not at the foundation. The old Copenhagen habit says measurement gives a result. Do not ask too much about the underlying reality or history of that result. Born-Hilborn says the question cannot be avoided because the result arrives with a history. The old brain memory assumption says the past is stored in neural tissue. Born-Hilborn says the brain may access selected history rather than contain the entire past. The old deterministic picture says the past pushes the future. Hilborn says the selected future also waits which past compatible histories become coherent. There's a pull. None of these revisions are arbitrary. They follow from the same pressure point. Definite records require selected histories. Now imagine the measurement problem as a locked door. Copenhagen gives us a key to the laboratory. It opens the door of prediction. Decoherence gives us a key to classical appearance. It opens the door of environmental separation. Many worlds gives us a key to unitary evolution. It opens every door and calls the hallway elegant. Pilot wave gives us a key to definite trajectories. It opens the path door using weak measurements and proclaimed path averages. Averages being the key word because they never follow anything. Objective collapse gives us a key to physical collapse. It says the lock breaks the law. Born-Hilborn asked whether the door was mislabeled. Perhaps the question was never merely which outcome. Perhaps the question was always which history do we need to reach that outcome. Then the key changes shape. The solution is not a tiny click. The solution is history selection. The solution is a whole coherent world. So does Born-Hilborn need technical collapse? No, that is one of its strengths. From inside experience, measurement looks like collapse. We see possibility become record. But from the larger block universe view, the selected history may already contain the variables, records, observers, memories, and future consequences. The so-called collapse is the local experience of entering the selected record. So think again of the film. A character inside the film does not see the whole movie. The character reaches a scene, experiences revelation from inside the story. Something becomes known from outside the film. The entire structure is presented as one completed work. That does not mean the character's experience is unreal. It means the internal experiences in the whole structure are different perspectives. Born-Hilborn says collapse may be that kind of event. From within time, collapse, from the whole history perspective, selected structure. This harmonizes collapse language with block universe logic. It also preserves the deep intuition that the future can matter without turning reality into a time travel circus. A future record can help determine which history is coherent. But once a history is deeply recorded and deeply embedded, later selections must remain compatible with it. The past is not a hallway. The past is the selected ledger. Now let us speak directly to the clever materialist. You are right to demand rigor. You are right to distrust distrust sloppy mysticism. You're right to ask for explanatory power, but materialism is not rigor by default. Sometimes it's just familiarity with a microscope. Science is not the worship of matter. Science is disciplined explanation, and philosophy if it includes it. If matter alone cannot explain why a quantum possibility becomes one definite record, then matter alone is not the final answer we seek. If brain storage alone cannot explain memory as relation to selected history, then brain storage is not the final answer we seek. If random collapse gives outcomes without histories, then random collapse is not the final answer. If deterministic machinery gives past pushing without future compatible selection, then deterministic machinery is not the answer. The final answer must account for possibility, record, observer, memory, expectation, and history. That is why this mathematics is so powerful. It does not throw away the physics. It completes the questions physics has been asking. Quantum mechanics supplies possible histories. Space-time expectation weighs them. Reality selects the coherent history. That is the measurement problem resolved as history selection. Now let us imagine the detector click one last time. A detector clicks. A lab book records. A scientist remembers. A paper is written. A future student reads. A later theory interprets. The click is not alone. The click becomes part of a chain of meaning. Now ask what the measurement problem has been asking all along. Why this chain? Why this record? Why this world? Bohr-Hilborn says because this is the history selected from quantum possibility by space-time expectation. Not random magic or manifesting, not dead machinery, not infinite branching without experience selection, not a hidden pellet root, a selected history. And when you see that, the measurement problem changes character, it changes shape, it stops being an embarrassment. It becomes a doorway into the reality that we know and love. The measurement problem was never merely a problem about instruments. It was a problem about reality becoming definite. It was a problem about how possibility becomes memory. It was a problem about how observers enter physics. It was a problem about how the world has a past. It was a problem about how the future can matter. It was a problem about how mind and matter belong to one explanatory structure. The click was small. The implication is cosmic. The equation gives possibilities. The apparatus gives record. The record requires history. The observer is inside that history. Memory relates the observer to the selected past. Expectation weights possible futures. Future coherence weights past compatible histories. Collapse is how selection appears from within time. Reality is the coherent selected from quantum possibility. That is the Bohr-Hilborn answer, and it is not obscure. It only sounds strange because people were trained to ask smaller questions. They ask, why this outcome? Why is the cat alive? Why is the cat dead? Or is the cat both? Bohr-Hilborn asks, why this history? Once you ask the better question, the model becomes almost obvious. The result is never alone. A result arrives with a history. A cat arrives with a cat history. A detector click arrives with an experiment history. A memory arrives with a lived history. A self arrives with a self history. A future observes arrives with an ancient history. Every outcome needs a history. A soul has a Markov blanket personification history. Every record needs a history. Every world needs a history. And reality is the selection of that history. That is why the measurement problem matters. Not because it shows physics is broken, because it shows reality is deeper than the old materialistic picture. The universe is not a heap of dead objects waiting for brains to accidentally hallucinate meaning. The universe is a coherent history selection structure in which mind, memory, expectation, and measurements are not afterthoughts. They are all part of the mechanism. You are part of the mechanism. The measurement problem asks how possibility becomes one world. Bohr-Hilborn answers through weighted history selection, quantum possibility, space-time expectation, coherent history. That is the rule. That is the repair. That is the fix. That is the doorway. And if we follow it honestly, the world becomes less dead. Not less scientific. It becomes more lawful, more intelligible. This mathematics opens up new sciences, new discoveries, new opportunities. We're more connected, more hopeful. Because if history is selected, then consciousness is not an accident left over after matter finishes the serious work. Consciousness is part of the way reality becomes definite. Memory is not a disposable ghost of neurons. Memory is relation to selected history itself. Death is not automatically meaningless deletion in this model. Death is a safer waking up process. It may be one transition in a larger teleological structure of experience, memory, and future coherence. That is not the main topic, but it is the horizon the measurement problem has been pointing toward all along. The selected history, the detector clicked, the physicist wrote the result. The cat had a past. The observer remembered. The world became one history. And the old question finally changed. Not why did this outcome occur, but what history did reality select? That is the deep question. What history did reality select? And the Bohr-Hilborn rule gives that answer. Reality is quantum possibility weighted by space-time expectation selecting the coherent history. History selection, history selection, history selection. Once you see it, the measurement problem is no longer a wound in physics. It is the opening through which physics becomes completed. The equation on your screen finishes physics and opens the door to new understandings. History selection writes the scripts for us. We can only go with the flow or sit out a few rounds. Our only free will is acceptance of or denial of thoughts in this model. Thoughts are our karma. Thoughts and memory are the same as measurement. Contemplate that for as many lifetimes as we require. We are already in the dreamscape of all that is. This earth air has more registry. We are all, but you are individual because of the personification you built towards over many lifetimes. You evolved into God yesterday, but with hindsight in 2020. This math tells you what to think of this video. Faith waits the quantum world. Expectation threads past and future until one enchanted history wakes as reality. Reality is not born from blind dice, but from faith made mathematical. Expectation bends quantum possibility across space-time, choosing the past that can carry the future until one luminous history rises from the dream and calls itself real. History selection means desire, and it's attached. Warning, worry. Focusing imagination is not merely wishing, it is long-range spiritual pressure applied to quantum possibility. When expectation is held with faith, emotion, repetition, and coherence, it waits the histories in which that future can arrive. The past then seems to organize itself towards the soul's chosen horizon, not by childish magic, but by space-time mathematics, as seen on your screen. The future we love begins pulling compatible histories into place. Manifesting becomes disciplined participation in creation, a sacred collaboration with reality's hidden arithmetic. It becomes what we perceive of as real magic and miracles. This is the mathematics on your screen and a glimpse into the universe it unveils. History selection is the soul's quiet proof that expectation is prayer in mathematical form. What the mind faithfully waits, reality begins arranging into a path. Buddhism teaches mind precedes all things. As the Dhammapada teaches, the mind precedes all things. History selection says expectation walks before reality, preparing the road the soul will later call fate. As the Gita teaches that a person is shaped by faith, history selection says the world is shaped by expectation. Consciousness is brave enough to sustain. As the Quran teaches that a people's condition changes when they change what is within themselves. History selection says inner expectation is the first motion of outer reality. As Christ teaches that seeking becomes finding, history selection says faithful expectation is not passive hope, but the soul choosing that path reality must learn to reveal. As wisdom traditions teach that the disciplined mind becomes destiny's doorway, history selection says the future is not found by accident, but weighted into being by faith. In this model, all religions are correct about memory and mind being too large for brain-body, and this model teaches all religions were correct about death as a safe waking up process. Death is safer than many imagine because of the spiritual aspects of the mathematics on your screen. Physics is science, biology is a sect of atheism. This math makes death a waking up process. Death is but a dream, shaboom, shaboom, and then we wake up. We are allowed to think whatever we accept while here. The end.